So.
Oh, good.
Thank you for having me. So I'm going to talk a little bit about and kind of introduce, for those of you that don't know much about the SMU Archaeology program. Some of you do, and some of you probably don't. And we're going to talk a little bit about some kind of common themes. Partnership and citizen science are two themes that I want to touch on, and that kind of bring together what I'm trying to do with the collections at SMU today. And I'm going to try to draw a line to the past. As an archaeologist, I study the past, and I think that the past is informative if we want to kind of talk about the future as well. And so I'm going to try to draw in those themes from the past and bring them into the present. And to kind of contextualize things, in 1936, the Dallas Archaeological Society was established, and it had very strong connections to SMU's geology and paleontology programs. SMU at the time did not have an archaeology or anthropology program at all. And in 1936, archaeology and paleontology often went hand in hand. In 1955, as most of you or some of you are aware, the Tarrant County Archaeological Society was founded. SMU still did not have an anthropology or archaeology program. And the DAS and TCAS oftentimes worked together, and you had members of both organizations who would participate in each other's projects, were oftentimes members of both groups. And most of those members were members of TAS as well. So there's a fairly active archaeological community in North Texas into the mid-20th century. And it's not really until 1965 when SMU decided that they were going to build an archaeology program. And I made this joke at the SAs. It didn't go over very well because most people weren't aware of SMU's reputation. But when SMU builds a program, generally that means that they buy a program. And what they did was they bought Fred Wendorf and Fred Wendorf's crew that had been doing archaeology in Egypt to bring to SMU so that they could basically buy that work and make it theirs. One of the first things that Fred Wendorf did was he hired Ed Jelks away from UT to establish the River Basin Surveys Program, or as it was known at SMU, the Texas Archaeological Salvage Program. Confusingly, the salvage program at UT was also called the Texas Archaeological Salvage Program. I think that they were trying to kind of co-opt some of that glory and bring it to Dallas. Art King Harris was one of the founding members of DAS, was given an honorary degree and named official curator of SMU's collections, and was oftentimes given co-sponsorship on grants to do various projects under the auspices of the Texas Archaeological Salvage Program. And it's during this time, so here's Fred Wendorf, Joel Shiner, another faculty member that came with him, Ron Wetherington, another faculty member that came with him, and there's Ed Jelks on Wichita site up along the Red River. Ned Woodall, one of his early graduate students, kind of leaning in, and Curtis Tunnell kind of consulting. And there's Art King Harris and Jay Blaine, two very prominent amateurs in North Texas archaeology. To kind of emphasize that from the get-go, the archaeology program at SMU involved partnership with local avocational amateur archaeologists. It wasn't an ivory tower, if you will. There was a welcoming in and an involving of them from the get-go. And we see this in some of the earliest projects. Here in the top left, we have a number of two of the early graduate students that came to work with Ed. Desmay Lorraine and Norma Hochrichter. And there they are standing with Evelyn Walters, who was part of the Iran Archaeological Society out in far west Texas. And Joe Rivas and John Sims, who also were part of that archaeological society. Some of the early graduate students, there's Ned Woodall, Harold Jensen, Reed Faring, Mark Parsons, Kathleen Gilmore, a number of folks whose names, if you're familiar with the archaeology of North Texas, you probably recognize, because they have gone on to have long and illustrious careers for the most part. And they got their training in this early kind of wave of salvage archaeology here at SMU. In 1968, Ed was given or offered a position at Illinois State University, which is how I ran into him because I'm actually from that neck of the woods. But he leaves SMU for Illinois State and never leaves Illinois State. So it must have been one heck of a good offer, one heck of a good place to work. And Fred Wendorf hired a colleague of his, Jim Sicenti, who had worked with Fred out in salvage archaeology in New Mexico, to come run that program, under the agreement that Jim would finish his dissertation in 3 years. He got 4 years that he didn't finish, and so Fred kicked him out of the program. And I'm not exactly sure, maybe Alan can inform us, but somehow or another, Alan Skinner, a young graduate student who hadn't finished his dissertation at this point, was named the head of that program. The end of the River Basin Surveys program, by this time the funding had shifted, and the salvage program at SMU had reorganized into what they called the Archaeology Research Program. Business was apparently really good in the 70s. And at some point, I think that they were doing like 15 or 16 projects a year. Busy enough that by 1977, Alan hired Mark Grady as an assistant director to come in and help to take care of all of this project, all this work was going through. And again, we see a whole host of people who've gone on to have long, prominent careers in Texas archaeology and elsewhere, including Britt Bousman, Jim Garber, Tim Pertola. Tim was not a graduate student at SMU, but he came to SMU to work on projects that were being done by the ARP. Olin McCormick, I don't know if Alan has seen that photo in a while, but I couldn't resist throwing it in there. Jim Broussef. But again, we still see this kind of involvement of local amateurs. For example, Bob Stiles from Wood County was deeply involved, began to become deeply involved in ARP projects, starting with the Lake Fork project, and he would go on to continue working with SMU and other university contract programs through the 80s and into the 90s. In 1978, Grady dies from a car accident. In 1979, Alan was dismissed from SMU. And in 1980, a guy named Mark Robb, who most of us don't really associate with Texas archaeology, was hired to direct the ARP. And Robb promptly leaves 3 years later. If you want to know the reasons behind all of these sort of things, we could have a long conversation and you have to provide some bourbon and to talk about that. It was not a pleasant time, nor was it a stable time. Nonetheless, into the 80s, we still see a number of people who have continued to go on and have prominent careers in Texas archaeology, some of whom have faculty positions still, including Tom Gudajon, Gary Rutenberg, Dan Greger, Randy Moyer, and this older guard from the 70s, including Dwayne Peter, Jim Broussef, et cetera, continue to work at SMU, assisting with projects. Jim was around for so long that in 1984, he was appointed as the director of the ARP, and he directed it for 2 years until he graduated, received his PhD, and went on to work at the Texas Historical Commission. At that point, direction was given to Randy Moyer and David Journey. And 5 years later, the Brain Trust at SMU decided that what they really needed was a big heavyweight person to come in and direct the ARP to bring it back to that mid-70s glory days from when it, similar to when Alan was running things. So they hired Jim Ottavazio from Mercyhurst College. And 2 years later, SMU promptly closed the entire program down. I'll let you read into that, what you read into that. Between the closing of the ARP, so no longer doing contract archaeology, so no longer going out and taking contracts for highways or reservoirs, SMU functioned as a repository, meaning that they accepted collections from various institutions, including the Army Corps of Engineers, the National Park Service, other CRM programs in North Texas. for a fee in much the same way that TARL operates today, CAS or CAR. And once again, the Brain Trust at SMU decided in 2003 to eliminate the funding for the single person who was responsible for managing those collections. Those collections were effectively abandoned. And if you have visited, I know some of recent SMU grads were around when prior to the kind of reinvigoration of this program, the storage conditions were less than optimal. In 2008, the DAS closes in part because of lack of membership and involvement. And in 2019, as Jimmy informed me a few months ago, the Tarrant County Archaeological Society reorganized itself into NTAS. So in some ways, you guys are the last ones standing. And in some ways, I and my fearless colleague and undergraduate students and graduate students are also the last ones standing. A few years ago, another faculty member, and I can't take credit for this, another faculty member at SMU took interest in the collections at the university, recognizing that the way that they were being stored was far substandard, and that there was a great need to do something with them to bring them up to modern standards. And she embarked on a 5-6 year mission to raise money, to renovate facilities, to hire undergraduates, to inventory, to document, et cetera. Right now, SMU is the only university in North Texas where you can receive both a master's and a PhD program in archaeology. Other programs that had CRM programs that might have had PhD programs in the past no longer do. So if you want to do a career in archaeology and you don't want to leave the DFW area, we're pretty much the only game in town if you want to get a doctorate. The long kind of history of neglect of most of our collections means that we have about 60 years of archaeological collections under our roof, but almost none of them are currently stored in according to modern curatorial standards defined by Texas state and or federal law. SMU has never been certified by the Texas Historical Commission as a curatorial facility. It's a state law that was passed 20 years ago. And we are not in compliance with that law because there was nobody to receive the mail when the THC emailed or sent snail mail. Everything's emailed now. It sent the message to SMU saying, hey, there's this new law that you need to comply with because you hold state property in your collections. And this is a point that I touch on every opportunity I can. Coming in as somebody, I wasn't alive when most of these collections were made. And there is currently only one faculty member in our department at SMU who was on the faculty when the ARP was operating. And he's currently a year or two out of retirement. There is nobody at SMU, staff or faculty, that knows anything about these collections. They were not involved with their generation. They were not involved with writing reports. They have not known about them in some cases. And so the collections and our group are largely opinionated about history. We don't know the history behind those things. And if you've ever worked in archaeology, if you've ever worked with collections, you know that that history is important. You need to know what the stuff is, where it came from, why decisions were made, etc. Meanwhile, NTAS has grown into the largest regional archaeological society in the state, and it's the sole society serving North Texas. You guys don't need me to tell you this, but NTAS is very active. For a long time, had a great field school going on, and your members are wonderful. I learned that 2 years ago when I first gave a presentation here, and Charlene and I spent probably an hour talking. And that led to a paper. It's led to all sorts of other relationships. And most importantly, I would say that some members of NTAS actually were involved with the ARB. And they have that history and that knowledge, both from SMU and the Dallas Archaeological Society and the Tarrant County Archaeological Society, that we need to maximize our understanding and use and research capabilities of these collections, without which they would just be boxes in rocks in boxes, rocks in box, turning into Gollum up here. Boxes. One of these collections that is just rocks in boxes is the collection from the 1971 to 1972 Texas Archaeological Society Field School, performed over the course of 2 weeks in those 2 years, surveying in the Turtle Creek watershed near Paris in Kerr County, Texas, sponsored by then SMU graduate student Alan Skinner. Over 550 people participated in these field school programs over the course of those 2 years. The surveys were primarily surface surveys, sending 550 people out to survey a ranch in the middle of Texas. Must have been absolutely, I would have lost my mind. So full credit to Alan for being able to manage it and to document over 230 individual archaeological sites, and then to lead testing at 3 of these sites and an intensive, minimally disturbing collection at 1 large bird rock community. And when I say minimally invasive, basically lining out units and collecting the first 6 inches off of that. All of those collections were taken to SMU afterwards for study and for curation. And the results of these 2 field seasons form the basis for Alan's dissertation work. I found this letter in the documents that we hold, because we don't just have the document or the artifacts from the field school. We have all of the documents, all of the photographs, the slides, the negatives, the paperwork, the invitations, etc. And at that time, the then president of the TAF, Jay Blaine, referred to this as the most successful field school in the history of the society. I don't have any graduate students right now that are running field schools, but if I received this letter from somebody about a graduate student running a field school, that would go a long way in terms of me appreciating them and valuing them. It is glorious. It is just very excited about the job that Alan did running that field school. And I would like to think that that might have had something to do with his choice for the director of the ARP position. Because shortly after that, Alan was hired to run the CRM program. Many of the sites, the 230 or some odd sites that were identified, were assigned site numbers from TARL, but not all of the site data was submitted to TARL. And I think that we can all be a little bit sympathetic, because it's not like, you know, Alan was resting on his laurels at the time. There were a lot of sites and a lot of data to deal with. In keeping with the time, most of these collections were not inventoried. This is 1972 and 1973. And for those of you who don't know, there was no such thing as a laptop computer or even a desktop computer. There was a computer center that was as big as this room, and everything had to be hand entered into it. So it's not unusual for these early collections to not be inventoried. Now, here's where things get a bit pear-shaped. At some point between 1973 and today, nearly every collection at SMU has been reboxed. Somebody has gone in and removed the original boxes or bags in which the things arrived at SMU in, and they've created new bags and new boxes and new tags. And they have made the mistake of discarding the original documentation. So generally speaking, when we rebox something archaeologically, we hold on to the old bag. because we might make a mistake in copying the information over to a new tag. If you throw away the old stuff and you make a mistake, there's no way to fix that mistake. So these collections were reboxed around 1986. All of the original materials were discarded. And there is absolutely zero record of this work. Today, if we were doing this, we would write a report or some sort of document that says, we did this, and here's what we did, and here's the problems that we found. And it's a little breadcrumb for people 50 years in the future who want to know why Brian Luchford counted 56 flakes instead of 74 flakes in a particular bag. This has led to innumerable problems with our collections, because again, we don't know anything about that work that was done, aside from what we can glean from talking to people who may have participated. And this is kind of what the collection looks like today. For those of you who've come to SMU for one of our open lab days, this should look quite familiar. The records were at one point disorganized. I'm happy to say that they are about 50% organized now, but they are still on acidic paper, meaning that they are starting to turn brown and they are starting to affect the other papers that they are packaged with. When everything was repackaged in the 1980s, another poor choice was made, and that choice was to use 2 mil plastic bags. I don't know if you've ever seen what happens when you pour 5 pounds of razor sharp flint flakes into a 2 mil bag, but it's the wrong tool for the job. And especially if you then take those bags and you put them into a non-climate controlled environment that's hot, cold, high humidity, low humidity, those bags turn into confetti. And several of you have experienced the touching of those bags and feeling all the microplastics just go into dust. Most of the boxes were labeled with an acidic cardstock card and label. You can see how brown those are. You can also see the pest damage, the little silverfish and other things that are nibbling away. And you can see how the person who wrote those labels out used a ballpoint pen rather than archival ink. So in some cases, the labels are completely unreadable. And all of this is stored in about 65 to 70 strongly acidic boxes that are overpacked, overweight, some of which when you pull off the shelf, they collapse because there's 25 pounds of rock in there and the box is rated for 5 pounds. It's in a miserable shape, as many of you can attest. So after my last talk 2 years ago, Charlene and I had a wonderful conversation. And I got this phone call from this guy named Brian, who said he was interested in maybe exploring how SMU and NTAS could maybe do something. He was the events coordinator, is that right?
Vice President of Projects.
Yeah, Vice President of Projects. This sounds more formal than the events coordinator. Yeah. And I had just taken charge of managing these collections. And one of the things that I learned as an undergraduate and as a graduate student was that if you want the public to care about archaeology, you have to give them a reason to care. You have to let them be vested in the work that we're doing. I teach a pseudo-archaeology class at SMU, and if you go on social media, you'll find all sorts of people who think that professors sit in their ivory towers, smoking their cigars, drinking their brandy or whatever it is, and just speculating about archaeology, and that we have all the money in the world, and that everything that we do is just easy. And couldn't be farther from the truth. We have pest-infested, decomposing archaeological stuff that we need to take care of. And it's not our fault. We didn't make this mess. This mess is inherited in part because of the system that we operate. So when Brian approached me, I was already thinking about a community-based project. And the TAS Field School project jumped out in my head as one thing that would be an ideal project for NTAS and SMU partner. As is keeping in the time, no funds have been or were provided for the curation of these materials. This is pretty standard in 1971, 72. Nobody was thinking about long-term curation. The TAS Field School project holds a common theme with some of the goals and values of NTAS, in that it is a citizen science project, and you guys, as far as I'm concerned, are citizen scientists. It also provides opportunities for people who have a lot of different needs, wants, desires out of archaeology. Maybe you're like a certain someone who doesn't want to count the 15 pounds of snail shells that were collected. Maybe you don't want to count flakes. Maybe you want to look at arrowheads. Maybe you want to look at something else. There's lots of things, lots of ways that people can contribute, whether it's through counting and inventorying debitage, whether it's through washing artifacts, whether it's through doing quality control and quality assurance to make sure that our data entry is correct. Maybe it's scanning documents or scanning photographs. All of these things need to be done, and people of all sorts of different backgrounds and areas of expertise can contribute. It also is an excellent opportunity to educate the public about why this is important. This is what happens when you have a collection that is neglected for 15 years. 15? Almost 25 years. And this is what happens when you do a field school and you make a huge collection. We're responsible for it for eternity if we want it to be useful. And that's something that's, we can say it, we can talk to our students about it, but when you see it firsthand and you see bags falling apart and artifacts being mixed from different contexts, it hits home, because in that moment, you've lost the entire reason for having those artifacts. You start to recognize this is a problem. And if I'm going to plan a project in the future, I should consider this. And again, come back to the kind of dovetailing with opportunities, accessibility. Our lab space is ADA accessible. And if you want to do archaeology, but you don't want to go out in July in Texas, you can come to our lab where it's basically a meat locker. 67 degrees or so year round. In the summers, I think it feels wonderful. In the winters, I think it feels even better. Not many people agree with me, but I'm from up north, so it allows people who have different physical abilities to participate. Old, young, wheelchair bound, not wheelchair bound, health concerns, no health concerns. There's no real limit here. So when Brian contacted me, I was already thinking about these things. And I said, okay, Brian, I had him over to SMU and I showed him the attic where the stuff was stored. I talked about it. I said, well, let's try it out for 6 months, I think you said. And in 6 months, at the end of 6 months, the program was so popular that we said, we'll go for another 6 months. And then at the end of a year, let's do another year. It has been, I think, a wonderful success. And I hope that the folks that have participated agree with that. And if you don't know, it's basically, we open the doors at 9 o'clock in the morning. There's free coffee. Usually I bring donuts or something else to eat. And we sit around the lab and we inventory, count, document, etc. More often than not, we have wonderful conversations. Usually Jimmy's doing more talking than working. You've got JB there because at least you do something. And I see a lot of faces in the crowd here who have actually participated. And if you haven't participated, you are more than welcome to. It has been wonderful, whether it's been 1 or 2 people that have showed up, or whether like last Saturday, 2 Saturdays ago, where we estimated we had over 75 people that came through the door. Absolutely, it was great, but it was horrible. Because I came in at 8:30, I was half an hour late, so I was already at my back foot. Colleague had already helped start setting things up, and at 9 o'clock, there were kids in the door, and it was nonstop until probably 12:30, 1 o'clock. And after that, it was maybe 5 people, so the afternoon was just nice and chill. But that morning was just crazy, but afterwards, it's like, you think about how many school kids and adults came through and experienced a little bit of archaeology, and if you plant 1 or 2 acorns in those kids' heads, maybe they grow up to be the next Alan Skinner, Jim Broussef, etc. If we're talking about just the sheer impact on helping us with our obligations with these collections, NTAS has made a significant difference. I should point out, as I mentioned a second ago, that the TAS did not provide any funding for the curation of these collections. Which means, as somebody who has collections that have already had curation fees paid for, or that we are responsible for the state of Texas or for the National Park Service to curate, the TAS Field School collections are not at the bottom of the priority list, but pretty close. And so we probably would not make collections for another 20 years. But the state in which they are in means that in another 20 years, they probably will be worthless in terms of research perspective. And so NTAS's participation has allowed us to inventory at the piece level over 320 pounds of artifacts. Over 40,000 pieces of debitage, nearly 300 projectile point fragments, ore scrapers, etc. Almost 1,000 photographs that have been digitized from film. All of the paperwork has been scanned in, accounting for about 60 gigabytes of digital storage. None of this would have been possible without NTAS. And the fact that we accomplished this in under 2 years is astounding to me, in a good way. Now, I didn't know this at the time when Brian and I first started talking, but the year prior to me taking over the ARC, Ron Ralph had started a project with his own group of volunteers to kind of rectify the situation of that TARL and the THC had these site numbers, but didn't have all the information for the sites. And he had begun digitizing or transcribing site forms that he had gotten from TARL or from SMU to enter in. And when I saw this particular article come out in the fall of 2022, I said, holy cow, that's the project that I want to work on. And so I contacted Ron and John, and we began talking, and I began funneling to them all of the stuff that I was digitizing, that we were digitizing, all of the work that we were doing, so that they could enhance their own work with the work that we were doing, coordinating over email and Zoom. And so in this way, this project actually has kind of worked side by side with another project that in a way that we both benefit from directly. There have been other kind of unforeseen consequences. For starters, a tremendous increase in the awareness of what we do at SMU in terms of the collections. And I think of NTAS as well. I don't have the data, but maybe Jimmy and I can sit down and talk at some point about seeing, has there been a demonstrable impact on donations, memberships, et cetera. One of the things that I'm very keen on is bridge building with people who work in the private sector in cultural resource management here in Texas. And I'm very happy to know, or to say that when we have these open labs, we get people who work for those firms that come in. This provides opportunities for students who might be participating, whether they be from SMU or somewhere else, to begin building those professional networks. It has led to an increase in our donations in the collections. We have also had some buy-in and participation from regional indigenous groups, including a donation of about $500 that allowed us to build a teaching trunk that is available for free for anyone to use in the DFW area. Just have to contact me and they can check it out for a week. And it is paid for by a donation from a local person who is part of the kind of urban Indian League here in Dallas. It has also allowed us to partner with the Caddo Nation of Oklahoma for an upcoming project that I hope I can talk to you about in a few months, maybe a year. All of this means new opportunities for education and outreach. And if education and outreach are not my priorities as a university professor, then I probably shouldn't be a university professor. And they're not opportunities for me. They're opportunities for the community. To bring this back to this idea of partnership. I don't see the work that I'm doing, the work that we're doing, as building a community. I see it as rebuilding a community. SMU's archaeology research program, Texas Archaeological Salvage Program, whatever we're going to call it, always had connections to local folks who were interested in archaeology from the get-go. And that community was disrupted for various reasons that all happened well before I was old enough to buy a beer. But now that I have at least ostensibly some power or some position, whatever that is, I can help rebuild that. To take the fallen down framework that was there and begin to rebuild it. And that's kind of a goal that I have. Another goal is to educate the public about archaeological concerns, whether they involve curation or the destruction of archaeological sites or anything else related to archaeology. By rebuilding that community, people begin to talk, have conversations, and increase awareness. They increase engagement, both with the public and with members or people, representatives, students from other institutions that don't have the resources that we do. We've had students from Dallas College, Tarrant County Community College, University of North Texas, University of Texas at Arlington, all come to our lab to get experience working with artifacts, working in a lab, talking to other archaeologists. It also, I think, helps to share these responsibilities. Whose responsibility is it to curate this stuff and to take care of it? Well, in part, it's SMU's responsibility. I would also argue that we should be sharing that responsibility with the people of Texas. The collections were made under the auspices of the Texas Archaeological Society and SMU. And so we should jointly share that responsibility. I also think, and perhaps this is my own bias, coming from a large public university where I got my PhD, but I see universities serving a role as a center for communication and sharing of ideas, as a public center. And now that I have the authority of the position to be able to use that and to develop that, that's a primary goal that I have. Because that kind of a center doesn't exist in North Texas, as far as I'm aware, for archaeology, aside from your meetings. And if I can help, then I'm going to help. So I want to say, from the bottom of my heart, that this partnership with NTAS has been a significant achievement, and it has really meant a lot to me. And I hope that in the years to come that we continue to build this relationship out and explore new things. Now, I'll stop getting emotional about this. So what else is going on at SMU? Because we really haven't been active in the Texas archaeology scene for the past 20 years, 30 years. What other kinds of things are going on at the ARC today? Well, as NTAS and the ARC have been working on the TS Field School projects, we've also been working on other things. So it has allowed me to focus on other projects during the weeks in between each open lab day. And I'm proud to say that in the past year and a half, 2 years or so, that we have generated over 25 terabytes of data. As I said at the beginning, most of our records are on acidic paper. They are decomposing. This includes nearly all of the SMU reports that were ever produced under the auspices of the Salvage Project or the Archaeology Research Program, as well as other reports that we have in our libraries. Project records, site files, photographs, even films. So over the course of the 35, 40 years that there was contract archaeology being performed at SMU, a number of movies were made, either by KERA or by SMU's promotional offices. And we've managed to track some of these down and get them digitized, some of which have never aired before. The most recent one is one that was produced by a local filmmaker on the Lake Fork Reservoir project. And that project never finished. He never cut the film together. We, through connections at SMU, located the footage and found somebody to cut it together into a film. So you can actually go to our YouTube page and watch the half-hour film that was cut of a project that was being done before I was born. It's really cool. We also get to see what Wood and Rains County looked like before it was on the market. This has also allowed us to work on other archaeological collections that we are obligated to take care of because of state and or federal law. This includes the very first big project that Ed Jelks did with the National Science Foundation grant at SMU. Happy to say that this was begun to be rehabilitated during before COVID. COVID caused a break, but we finished it late last year. We began working on SMU's first held in trust or first THC permitted project. That was the Lake Bob Sandlin collection. We began working on that last year, but we realized within about a month that, again, poor curatorial practices from the 1980s had mixed an entirely separate archaeological collection into the boxes for that reservoir project. But we, through some sleuthing and some communicating, discovered that that collection had actually been donated to SMU by Bob Turner, who's a TAS fellow, donated it in 1969 or so. And somebody who didn't know that in the 1980s just mixed the two things together. So we spent the entire year disentangling these two collections so that we could be sure what belonged to what. But we are currently this year, as of 6 weeks ago, full steam ahead working with the Lake Bob Sandlin collections, which is, again, that was the first project that SMU performed that was permitted by the Texas Historical Commission. That would have been 1975. And all of this work with collections is well and good and all, but if it just goes into a box and nobody knows anything about it, we're not really doing that education outreach component of things. And so one of the first things that I wanted to do was build teaching kits that could be used at SMU and elsewhere. And it just so happened that when we got that $500 donation to build a kit, I went maybe a little bit overboard with the extravagance and the showmanship with the buying of the steamer trunk and everything else. But we used one of our unprovenienced collections, stuff that has, we don't know the sites that it comes from, to build one of these out. And we've helped NTAS by the donation, through the donation or the providing of other unprovenienced artifacts to build additional kits. And I'm hoping that we can continue to do that. Because for us, those unprovenienced arrowheads and pottery and other things, they have no research value to us if we don't know what site they come from or even what state they come from. And so if we can get them out into the hands of adults and kids to feel them, to hold them, to experience that connection with the past, maybe we grow another archaeologist. Similarly, we, through the course of the ARP and the TASP, folks built a whole bunch of different comparative collections. We have a comparative collection of marbles, a comparative collection of bricks, a comparative collection of pottery and bottles, and all sorts of other things. And all of this had previously just been boxed up and put into the attic where it serves nobody any good. And so one of the goals that I've had since taking over was to bring those boxes down, to dust them off, to digitize them, to catalog them, to make them available for people who work for various CRM companies or other private sector institutions, or people who are just interested in looking at historic marbles so that they could be used. We've continued to build out our library of North Texas archaeological materials, hoping that we can at some point have a library that rivals Allen's up in Richardson. I don't think we're gonna get there, but we're trying. And also to provide access to tools that members of NTAS and other folks who are interested in archaeology may not have immediate access to, including high quality photography equipment, 3D scanning, and 3D printing. And because I want to let people kind of see what that means, I brought in a couple of things that we've 3D printed off of our printer. And if you're interested in kind of exploring that, please feel free to reach out to me and we can talk. Because my feeling is that having access to these tools is one thing, but allowing people to access them to develop their own projects is also very important. So, in conclusion, I think my reading of the history of SMU's archaeology program is that from the get-go, there was this partnership with North Texas Archaeology. And my goal is to rebuild that. Because this partnership effectively ended in the 1990s when ARP was closed, and the last people that did Texas archaeology left SMU. And in the past 2 years, I think that NTAS and our partnership with NTAS has really helped to build a foundation to begin rebuilding this relationship. And so, whoops, go back. We can't show that one yet. That's the last, I'll save the best for last. So it is work by NTAS members and other folks who have heard about this program on our Facebook pages, on your posts, who've talked to you, who you've talked to, who've come out, and even if they've been there for a day, they didn't come back. It has allowed us to build and to tackle this massive backlog of stuff that needs to be done. And for that, I am really, really grateful. Sometimes it can be really messy, as I'm sure, or really frustrating, as anyone who's been there can attest to. But sometimes it can be a lot of fun. And I'm sorry that I used the same picture with the same shirt. Walked in and it was like, does he own another shirt? Oh. It's like I wore white to a wedding. So I want to say thank you to you guys. And thank you to everyone who might be on Zoom or who just happened to participate because they talked to an NTAS member. Thanks for coming out and helping. Because all of you have done this. And it's not just coming out to help catalog artifacts. There are some people who will not be named, who might be in the audience today, who might just show up and just drink all of my free coffee.
It's the best coffee.
And that's okay, even though I love to give, I love to rid those people about doing that. It's great to have former SMU graduate students who were part of some of these projects around and able to be available for talking to and hearing stories about the people and the projects that were done. So I just want to real quick thank a couple of people, specifically Alan Rutherford, Jimmy, Charlene, and Jen. I should also acknowledge that part of Ron and John's team include Paul McGuff, Teresa Farley, Andy Burcham, David, Jennifer. All of them have been helping with the transcription of those site forums. I also want to thank the 550 some odd participants of the original field schools and the over 150 people who in the past year and a half have come out for at least one day to SMU to help out like this. And last, I owe a tremendous amount of thanks to Alan Skinner and to AR Consulting because they have been incredibly supportive both of this project, but of the ARC and the collection work that we're doing specifically. And it would not be possible without that kind of support. So thank you guys. And thank you for the opportunity to do this with NTAS and to partner with you guys. It's been great. Take some questions. Jay, do you want to answer what's the?
I need a copy of that. I don't have a copy of that photo. That's gotta be 1976.
I'm just gonna.
That's Luttenberg, second, third from
Ruttenberg,
left.
yeah.
Like how my eyes aren't that good. Oh, man, I wish I looked like that now. That's gotta be 19.
So do I.
I know. So does it. Health food.
You look like Gandalf with a sword.
Well, that's what a warm beer and a stale donut will do for you.
You think there's any interest in Dallas, in organizing another archaeological society?
No.
No.
I don't think so.
I'll defer. I certainly have not seen it. I'm not the most social, but I'm not a social butterfly. But in terms of the activities and the energy that NTAS has, I have not seen it in Dallas. And it might be one of those things where if you build it, they will come, Field of Dreams idea. I haven't seen evidence of that. Most of our participants for this, for example, have been coming from Tarrant County, from UT Arlington, from elsewhere. It's a shame. Yeah. If somebody's out there on Zoom and, has a different opinion, I'm happy to hear it, but. So,
No questions on Zoom yet, but you've got some accolades and clappy hands.
oh, that's great.
But I do want to add, first, I know from NTAS and participating with so many of the NTAS folks that NTAS has really enjoyed the opportunity, and it's been great for the society. It's great for folks to have an event that we can look forward to that's on the calendar. So we can always say, hey, there's something coming up. You like archaeology, you want to do some volunteer stuff, you want to learn, here it is. But with that, I want to make sure that folks know, on the calendar, we've got 2 lab days scheduled, between now and the end of the year. So mark your calendar for the last Saturday of this month and the last Saturday of November. So for those who have been, of course, that's great. If you haven't been, I think it's a lot of fun. We're laughing and we're doing archaeology, making friends, and there's so many tendrils that come out of it, like Dr. Matt has been talking about. So we're developing new projects. You're getting involved in projects that you didn't show up to participate in. So it's really an adventure in a lot of ways. So it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I would echo that idea of these different kind of tendrils, right? Just bringing people together who are like-minded, who have shared interests, and who just want to get involved in some way. It's amazing the number of things that you hear people talking about that spin off into something else. And that's, I think, the real benefit of having a center where people can come together and be there in person and talk about things, as opposed to, being isolated from each other or being just communicating over social media or that. To be in person, face to face, touching things, working things, seeing things. It's amazing the kind of ideas that pop up.
If I may, I used that kit last year in Grand Prairie quite successfully. I brought it all back and
more.
and more. And this year we used another kit that you had helped Jimmy to develop. And the kids were fascinated by the 3D printed pieces of pottery. And we were able to link those pieces with their pinch pot kit. And you could almost see, oh, I could do that. I could do that.
Yeah.
We had a great time.
Happy to hear.
Yeah.
I'm just curious, I can attest to seeing labs in similar situation, just never brought up to standard, disintegrating bags.
Yeah.
Weird artifacts sitting on shelves, so I guess after you presented this at SAA this year, did people come up to you and say like, oh yeah, we got the same problems, like, we wanna do that?
Yes.
I'm in.
Several people did.
That's
It was
awesome.
also kind of the theme of our session.
It was the theme of
And
our session.
community
That's
outreach.
right.
Yeah.
But I did receive several emails from folks who said, either I'm trying to do something similar, I want to do something similar, or I was trying to do something similar and left. Because there was no internal support. I've been, I should say, very lucky in that, the chair of our department, when I took over, basically said, this is yours, run with it.
Yeah.
I don't want to be involved. You can, sink or swim, you're on your own. And that's the kind of environment that I think I survived. That's how I went through graduate school, as my advisor. So that to me is kind of the environment that I like. I don't like a lot of micromanaging things. And so just being able to develop and try things. And again, it was, when Brian and I first started talking about it, it was, let's just try it out. Because I didn't know what to expect. I was like, this is either going to go really, really well, or it's going to go horribly wrong. And it's gone really, really well. But there were moments where I worried about 5-year-olds coming in and being like,
No kidding.
right? Yeah. But we've had 5-year-olds who, their parents bring them. And the 5-year-olds oftentimes are more attentive to following the rules than the adults are. Mostly because the adults are just sitting there drinking coffee and being distracted by other people who are sitting there. But, I mean, we've had people 5 years old, we have a middle schooler, sixth, seventh grade, who's come in a couple times, and he just goes right to the table and goes to work. It's astounding. And the kids that we had last week who were just, there to do their research for their Lego League projects. Some of their parents were like, we're gonna come back, this is great. Some of the kids were like, they just wanted to stay, they didn't want to go home. And it's great, because I'm sure everyone's kind of aware, very few people go into undergraduate saying, I'm gonna be an archaeologist, right? But if you can cultivate some interest in that, maybe they take an archaeology class for their curricular requirements once they get to college. And maybe that translates to, oh yeah, I remember I liked that a lot. And now that I'm kind of older, I see how this works.
You mentioned that there were regulations for being in compliance.
Yes.
How is that enforced, and is there oversight of that, or is it?
Oversight is managed by the Texas Historical Commission, and we are currently, a whole other project I'm working on is getting everything up to the point where we can actually fill in our applications and then begin the process. So, but the fact that this is one less collection that I have to worry about taking care of on a daily basis. And the fact that we're partnering with NTAS and doing things, I can't see how that would be a bad thing in that process. If Brad Jones is on Zoom listening to this, I'm really sorry. I didn't mean to speak for you, I'm sorry.
It seems
Sorry.
like one of those things that it is a tension between, like, you realize you're out of compliance, and then you're like, oh no, do I make it like real public that I'm out of compliance and try to do a big project like this, or like, whenever the rules like that come up, it just makes me think of like, oh, is this going to send things into hiding?
Sure.
Is it actually gonna do what it's supposed to do?
I mean, my view about that is. It's not, if it doesn't grab someone's attention, that this is the situation, it's likely not gonna change. And, if we wanna be honest about how we got to where we are, nobody at SMU today is responsible for what happened when they sold the ARP program to Mercyhurst College in 1993. And then nobody at SMU who fired the collections manager, and it didn't fire, they just ended the funding for the position. Nobody who's there today in those positions was there in 2003. And so nobody who's there today did these things, just like I didn't neglect a collection for nearly 50 years. So by talking about them honestly, I think it brings to people's attention, this is something that needs to be taken care of. If you don't talk about it and you keep it in the shadows, my concern would be that it's never actually dealt with. I mean, sunshine, it's a little sunlight, you know, was a good disinfectant for a lot of bad things. And, you know, in this case, you know, there's no archaeology police. There's no ICE equivalent for archaeology. They kick down our door and, you know, haul me off in chains. But it's something that we are obligated as an institution to do. And at some point, negative public pressure might, you know, occur. And at that point, then that's a different, but at least this way we're being forward thinking and saying, look, this is where we're trying to get to. And this whole thing is part of how we're trying to get to there. And you guys are part of that, and I hope that it continues on, so. Yeah.
Any questions?
If you haven't looked at 3D printed artifacts or the real artifacts, you're more than welcome to. You pick them up, touch them, don't put them in your mouth. Or do, they're not edible, but they're also not poison.
Mine mentioned that Hilda's talking about that antler
Oh, yeah.
annual meeting.
Sorry, little promo for another talk that is gonna be at the TAS meeting. Hilda Torres at Texas State, and Britt Bausman and Amy Reed and I are currently working on the real antler artifact. This is a 3D print of it. This was found in 1962 by an SMU paleontologist working in the Sulphur River. And a radiocarbon date on some charcoal adjacent to it, about 50 feet away, came back at 9,550 YBP. And if that date is the date of this artifact, this would be probably the oldest artifact in East Texas. And Britt and I, through Britt's bringing it to my attention and me being a very determined person, were able to locate the artifact in the Paleontology Museum at SMU to have it transferred into the archaeology collections at SMU. And we're currently doing some use-wear analysis on it, trying to have a direct AMS date performed on it, and a number of other things, including ancient DNA and some other studies that simply were not possible in 1962. So if you're at the TAS meeting, you can go learn about the artifact that came from. But it's a real camp for those of you who can't see it. So.
Well, I remember, please remember thanking that. Lots of snaps on Zoom. Yeah, so honestly, like, it couldn't have been a more fortuitous and talk. So last year we had watching the process, and now we've got something that we're actually involved in NTAS in society. And I think it speaks for everyone when we say, like, we're lucky to have him, we're lucky to have a lab, because it's very hard to find these educational opportunities. And I think having this as a steady, event, it really breathes a lot of life into what we already have to offer at NTAS. So, you're definitely helping keeping us pretty cool and doing the good stuff. So, and then we can work the other regional societies. Okay, we closing tonight. Thanks for everyone showing up here in person and Zoom. Hopefully I'll see a lot of you at the end of the week down in McAllen. Just a reminder, you're gonna come get those screens from when here after the meeting. But with that, we'll close our October 8th NTAS meeting, and thanks all for being here, and have a good evening. See you down.
Next month, regular.
Next month is on Thursday.
Yeah.